Doug Powell is here to talk to us on some more exciting opportunity and topics for us, talking about designers operating as leaders in such a complex world as that we live in right now. Doug is an award-winning designer. He's got more than 30 years of experience in so many different design disciplines. He's a lecturer, he's a commentator, definitely a very strong thought leader on all that is design. And he's been working in a design capacity as a vice principal of design or vice president of design at IBM for the past several years. Distinguished designer as well. Great mentor to me. Doug, let's hear what you got for us.
Hi, Katie. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
All right. Hey, great to see you, Katie. For those of you who didn't get it from Katie's introduction, we're longtime colleagues at IBM and former teammates on a great team that we worked together on a few years back. And Katie, it's great to see you today, and great to share the virtual stage with you. And it's really awesome to be with you all today at the Amuse Conference. Really thrilled and honored to have been invited to be with you. And I want to thank the conference team and everyone who's been involved in planning this event for the invitation. And I'm going to be talking to you, as Katie mentioned, today about designers as leaders, and this is kind of a new idea, because design is a relatively new practice and new profession. And so, what does it mean as we grow through our careers and we take on different leadership roles? And so I want to talk specifically about the qualities, the characteristics, the behaviors that we all have, many of us have, and what we need to be tapping into to really be effective leaders in complex organizations like IBM, and certainly in a complex world, which we are definitely living in now, of course, with all of the challenges that we have in the world right now. So as a way of kind of introducing my talk, I want to tell you a quick story. This is a picture of my friend Randy Hunt. I was speaking to him recently. Some of you may know Randy. He's the head of design at Grab. He's based in Singapore, and prior to working at Grab, he was the longtime VP of design at Etsy. So you might remember Randy from his many years growing the design program at Etsy. And Randy is a true pioneering design leader, and I always love talking to him. Randy was sharing with me the story of an executive strategy meeting that they were having at Grab with their CEO, Anthony Tan, and his entire C-suite. So all of his senior leaders. And you can imagine this meeting. We've all been in this meeting before. A bunch of smart people with all sorts of opinions, just talking over each other, arguing. Everyone's using buzzwords and acronyms and jargon. And as Randy tells it, he quickly he was kind of getting frustrated with this meeting, and so he quickly scratched out a thumbnail sketch on his notebook, and you can see kind of a reproduction of it here. But this sketch visualized how the company is organized operationally, and he took a picture of that with his phone, and he slacked it over across the table to the CEO, Anthony. And then he quickly scratched out another sketch of how he thought the company could be organized. And he did the same thing, took a picture, slacked it over to Anthony. And suddenly, the whole dynamic of the meeting shifted. No more arguing, no more yelling, no more buzzwords or jargon. The sketches had clarified the problem and the possible solution for Anthony, the CEO, in a way that the verbal debate was unable to do. It gave the team a single, simple idea to consume and respond to, and it focused them, and it advanced their discussion. So this crude visualization quickly became part of the kind of the currency of their new strategy. And versions of this sketch were exchanged and passed along as a way to explain and socialize the strategic plan that they were developing. So this episode added clarity, alignment, and velocity to the work that Randy and Anthony and their team were doing at Grab. Now, I want to put a pin in that story for a moment here. I'm going to come back to it and unpack it a bit later in my talk, and I'll share some other similar anecdotes from more of my design friends around the industry. But first, let me take a step back, and I want to take a broader look at where we are in the emergence of designers as leaders of complex scaled organizations. Because as I said, this is a relatively new thing in the business world. There was a great talk a couple of years ago that I attended by Kate Aronowitz, who is from Google Ventures. And I saw her speak at the Brainstorm Design Conference in Singapore back in 2019. And Kate told this awesome story of a study that she and her team at Google Ventures did, where they analyzed the LinkedIn job postings for executive design leaders. And they came up with a really astounding number to me. In fact, when she first put this number up on the screen, I thought, oh my goodness, Kate, there's a typo on your slide deck here. There can't possibly be 66,000 job postings on LinkedIn for executive design leaders. But in fact, it was true. It was, she went on to explain how they did this study, and that in fact, they found 66,000 postings for executive design leaders. That number just blew me away. This basically means that every company in the world is searching for an executive design leader. Now, the good news is that when we talk about design finally having a seat at the table, as we've been talking about for many years, this is a powerful piece of evidence to support that fact. Companies that only a couple of years ago were not investing in design are now not only investing, but at the very highest levels of their organizations, these executive levels of leadership. But this also reveals a really troubling question for me. Who are the 66,000 people who will fill these roles? Where are they now? What are they doing? And what skills do they have? Are they going to be prepared to take on these new roles when they get them? Now, I suspect that many of you, like me, have been thrust into leadership roles that we weren't really prepared for or properly trained for. And we simply had to kind of figure it out on our own. One of my favorite books from the last couple of years was The Making of a Manager by Julie Zhu, the former head of design at Facebook. That was a role, her head of design role, that she kind of came into very unexpectedly, much like the 66,000 people I just described, or the 66,000 openings. Julie does a great job in this book of opening up and humanizing her own experience as a leader and a manager. In fact, I love this quote here where she says, "The responsibilities of managing people felt like an enormous leap from creating user interfaces or writing code. Everything felt new and uncomfortable." Everything felt new and uncomfortable. That's something that I certainly have felt as I've moved from the actual doing of design to the leading of design and designers. So I think this book and this quote really points out that we are in the midst of an inflection point in the growth of design as a profession, as a professional practice, and where the demand of people capable of filling these leadership roles has suddenly exploded. There's just so much demand for it. And so if that's the case, I find myself asking this core question. What are the missing skills required to effectively play senior business leadership roles in complex organizations? And how do we as designers acquire them in the middle of our careers? And I really got curious about what exactly these missing skills are. Now, it's easy to assume that if we simply adopt, in the US, we would call them MBA like skills, the business school skills, that we should be good to go, right? That we just need to behave more like business people, and take some classes and learn the business stuff, and then everything would be good. But is that really the case? And are the traditional and accepted business school skills of leadership really what is needed right now? So I decided to investigate this question, and I found an interesting paper by the MIT Sloan School of Management, one of the big, highly regarded business schools in the U.S. And they spoke to thousands of business leaders, and they found something very interesting. They found that only 12% of business leaders strongly agree that their leaders have the right mindsets to lead them forward, and that less than 10% strongly agree that their organizations have the leaders with the right skills to thrive in the digital economy. So this is kind of worrisome. This is a problem if you are a leader in a complex scaled organization, right? So let's look at some more of the data that I found in this investigation. Forbes magazine: today's business schools are busy teaching and researching 20th century management principles and, in effect, leading the parade towards yesterday. The Harvard Business Review, one of the most eminent of business publications: business schools are on the wrong track. So, in other words, chasing after the established version of business leadership skills is not at all what we should be doing, according to this research. Yes, we must have a credible understanding of how our business is run, but it's a real mistake to simply adopt the flawed conventions of traditional business leadership from the past. These traditions or these traditional ways of leading businesses that were created for a completely different set of conditions. Interestingly, in the MIT Sloan report, there was an interesting clue. They said in the midst of that report, we identified a number of leadership teams that are embracing new ways of working and leading, and many of them are increasing transparency, demonstrating authenticity, and emphasizing collaboration and empathy. So MIT Sloan is saying there are a bunch of qualities that actually seem to be working well in this new digital economy for leaders. So that's very interesting to me. These qualities: transparency, authenticity, collaboration, and empathy, those sound like the skills and qualities of a great designer. Those are clearly and purely design-related qualities. So what MIT Sloan and these other sources are saying is that in order to lead effectively in this era of the digital economy, in this time of constant change and unpredictable challenges, we need a different set of skills that have been valued and taught previously. And my argument is that most designers actually possess the skills to effectively lead in this transformative era. Yet, interestingly, as this trend of design leadership roles has emerged over the past decade or so, I see in myself and in my peers a natural tendency to relegate our design skills rather than elevate them as we climb the corporate ladder and take on new responsibilities. Based on the evidence that I've just shown you, That is a missed opportunity, to put it mildly. So I'd like to reframe this core question that I just put out there, and to restate it, that as we step into these leadership roles in complex organizations, the question should be, how do we use design as a boost rather than a barrier? And how can we really maximize our unique qualities and skills as designers? And this is where we get back to Randy's story that I started to tell you about earlier in the talk. Now, as Randy was telling the story, he said, I know that Anthony responds to simple, direct messages, not a lot of words. Randy knew that Anthony was overwhelmed by the verbal debate that was going on in the room that day, and that they were never going to make progress in that mode of operating. He also knew that simply adding his own words to the mix would have only made it worse. So Randy used his core piece of human understanding, of user research in the moment, to design a very intentional experience for Anthony. That little picture that he took and sent it across the table by Slack, he quickly made a prototype, the sketch, and he delivered it to Anthony in a way that Anthony could consume it and digest it amidst the noise and distraction of that meeting. In a very simple way, at a very important moment, Randy tapped into his core skills as a designer to make a pivotal difference for his team. He turned a very typical episode of business leadership into a design problem. And as I connected with Randy and other peers in the design world, I began to pick up on similar patterns of behavior. And here are a few of them that I'll share with you. Raquel Returnetz is head of design at Aperture Health. And before that, she served as the design director for the Elizabeth Warren presidential campaign here in the US. And she told me an interesting story about how all of the cross-functional teams on the Warren campaign were sitting in the same office space, but they were still struggling to connect and collaborate. And that connection and that collaboration was critical because of the pace of their work in a political campaign is so fast and so relentless. And Raquel said she could literally see the dev team that she was collaborating with across the floor, but they hardly ever spoke to each other. So she and her design team unplugged their computers, dragged their desks over to the dev team's workspace, and sat down right next to them. And she said that it was a bit cramped, but it made a huge difference in their workflow and their agility. This is Sam Yen. Sam is was the longtime chief design officer at SAP. He's now at JP Morgan Chase, big financial services institution. And he told me about how he pays close attention to the language of design. He found that using the familiar design mantra, fail fast, fail early, can really turn off a business leader. Whereas when you turn that phrase to let's test and learn quickly, it gets a much more favorable reaction. So Sam is designing the language that he's using with his business leaders and stakeholders. James Helms is at Intuit. He's the head of design there. And he's careful to design the physical space, the physical space of meetings and workshops. How important is that? So none of these examples are like big breakthrough ideas. Instead, they're all surprisingly simple behaviors: moving the desks, using different language, visualizing something in a thumbnail sketch and using that to guide the conversation, designing the room that meetings and workshops are held in. These are all simple behaviors, intuitions that are rooted in the unique skills of these designers. So to revisit the findings of the Sloan School, each of these stories are cases where leaders have turned a business challenge into a design problem by embracing new ways of working and leading. I believe that if we can be more intentional about these behaviors to elevate them rather than relegate them, that we can have an even greater impact. So how do we do that? How do we relegate, or how do we elevate, I'm sorry, how do we elevate rather than relegate the unique behaviors of designers? Well, first, we need to understand what these behaviors are. And they are different for all of us based on our own design DNA, our own background, our own experiences. So here is a, sorry, going back here, I just showed a list of, an incomplete list of design behaviors that I see in myself and my peers. And many of these emerged in the stories that I told you a moment ago. Randy's picture making and prototyping, James's facilitation, Sam's storytelling, all of them are using empathy for their colleagues and stakeholders at the core of their work. So far, I haven't told you about myself or my role at IBM. So I want to kind of turn the page now and talk a little bit about our program at IBM and my role there. And I'm going to run a short video here in the background as I talk through that part of the story. So bear with me here. I want to make sure my audio is right. And okay. So I've been at IBM since 2013, a little over 8 years now, which is 2013 was the year that we launched our global user experience design program. I'm based in Austin, Texas, along with Katie Parsons, who introduced me earlier. And Austin is the home base and the flagship studio for our program. We now have more than 3,000 formally trained practicing designers and design researchers embedded in virtually every corner of IBM and all around the world. From our cloud, data, and AI product businesses to our client-facing consulting organizations, even in our corporate offices, our corporate HR, finance, and CIO offices have user experience design teams embedded within them. And here you can see on the video some examples of IBM Plex, our corporate typeface, Carbon, our award-winning design system, and the beautiful interactions, illustrations, iconography, and data visualization that have been created by our teams using the IBM design language. And all of these resources are open and publicly available for you to check out at ibm.com/design. And I'd encourage you to go check out that site. There's all sorts of great information about our program there, including some of the amazing work that our teams are doing around racial equity in design, which has emerged as many of you know, I'm sure, emerged as a real concern as we build design programs and making sure that the composition of our teams is reflective of the world that we are designing for. So there's really some great material here, ibm.com/design. You can also find our full human-centered design thinking practice and the digital learning platform that we have built for that practice, which we call Enterprise Design Thinking. And we now have more than 170,000 IBM employees who have completed this training and become badged as design thinkers, certified as design thinkers. That's roughly half of the company. And inclusive of all of our designers, of course, but importantly, most of that number are non-designers. Those are the cross-functional teammates who are working with designers every day. And also more than 200,000 people outside of the company, these are clients, partners, and academic programs, have also been badged. So a really impressive sort of adoption of our design thinking practice. And a few years ago, the research company Forrester Research released a total economic impact report on our practice of design thinking at IBM. And they found some really impressive data about the impact that our design thinking practice is having. They found that when teams are adequately staffed with designers, and when the rest of the cross-functional team are embedded in the designers are embedded in a team where the non-designers have been trained as design thinkers, it has a pretty dramatic effect on the performance of the overall team. And you can see here some of the outcomes of the study: 75% reduced time to gather and finalize requirements, 33% reduced development and testing time. Overall, it's helping these teams get from idea to market twice as fast as they would otherwise. And so that's an important piece of data for us, that we know that design thinking can help our teams move faster. So a big part of my job in the last few years has been to work with our design leaders who are leading these embedded design teams across the company. We now have more than 30 executive design leaders at IBM. So I've had the opportunity to be in the middle of this giant global laboratory of design leadership practices. And I've had the opportunity to kind of observe these designerly behaviors that I've been discussing actually happening. So the interesting thing is that the vast majority of these design executives kind of fit the persona that I've been discussing here. They're super talented individuals who started their careers as practicing designers, like many of us did, and who now have a bunch of responsibilities that extend far beyond those core skills that they started their career with. So one of the ways that I work with our community of design leaders at IBM is by facilitating a series of meetings between the executive design leader and the top business leader in their division. And at IBM, this business leader is known as a general manager, or a GM. And there are roughly 24 of these GMs across the company, with designers and design leaders reporting up to them. So these GMs, some of whom you see on the screen now, are the investors who are funding design in their business. So these meetings between the design leader and the GM are a critical way for them to understand the value their design team is delivering in order to hopefully continue increasing their design investment. We call the meetings between the design leader and the GMs, we call them executive design program reviews. And these program reviews, we started doing them 3 or 4 years ago, and they were super important when our distributed design program was reaching a key maturity point, when we had executive design leaders embedded in each of these parts of the business. So as I work with our design leaders to prepare for these program review meetings, we found that it's important to approach the meetings basically as a user experience design problem. Kind of like the stories that I shared with you a moment ago, where design leaders were thinking about their interactions with their stakeholders as design problems rather than as business meetings. And so if that's the case, we have to approach these GMs as our users, right? If this is a user experience problem, then the GM is essentially our user, and we need to understand them in a deep and human way, just as we would any user of any product or service that we are designing. So what do we know about these people, these GMs? Well, we know some very important information about them. We know that they're super busy people. This is a no-brainer. They don't have a lot of time. So our design program reviews are very, very brief. They're a tight 30 minutes, and they happen twice a year, usually in advance of key budgeting cycles. We know that these GMs make decisions based on data. So that's how we build the discussion. We know that they tend to be very opinionated people. And we also know that they're super competitive. They like to have a goal. And when we give them one, they tend to respond to it. They also hate it when they see that they are behind their peers in other businesses. So if we can say, hey, another business is ahead of you in a particular area, then that motivates them, right? They're driven by that. And all of this user research informs a 6-slide presentation deck, a template that covers staffing levels and ratios of design to other key disciplines, locations and studios where design teams are sitting, experience levels of designers, career levels, team health and attrition, along with a variety of user sentiment metrics like NPS and other things. Collectively, these data points come together into a narrative that clearly illustrates the value design is driving for these businesses. And it does so in a way that our GMs can understand and act on. And let me give you just a very brief and specific example of how this approach is to designing the experience of our program reviews is important. This is Mary O'Brien. Mary's the GM of the IBM Security Division, which is the group that developed our cybersecurity products, one of the most strategically important product divisions at IBM. And this is Haiti Francis, the design director for IBM Security. Haiti leads an award-winning team of about 40 designers who all report up to Haiti, who reports to Mary. So the executive design program review is essentially a conversation between Mary and Haiti. And one of the data points we want to highlight to Mary is the level of enterprise design thinking badges in her organization. Now, remember, this is that I told you a moment ago about the design thinking badges and how many of them we have across the company. And what's important is that we now know exactly how many design thinkers and at what level of practice are currently embedded in the IBM security organization. And so we can demonstrate that and discuss that with Mary. And we can show her how her teams are organized toward human-centered outcomes. Now, remember that because of our EDT badging program, we know exactly how many design thinkers are there, and we know what level of practice they're at. And in the security we know how many of them are in the security organization. And of course, from the Forrester study, Mary knows that when she has the right balance of design and design thinking on her teams, the teams are moving faster. And that's a real incentive for Mary. So by using data and by measuring the practice of our teams, we can design a very intentional and a very impactful conversation between our design leaders and their business leaders. And it works. The GMs really respond to this approach. Here is a quote from what one of our GMs, not Mary O'Brien, but another one, had to say at the end of a recent program review. He said, "I believe that user experience will allow us to win in the market. This review has helped me understand the need for design resources, and we have the ability to support this plan, this staffing plan that we had presented to him. We can double this design team with no problem." So in this particular meeting, this 30-minute meeting, we've convinced an IBM business leader to double his investment in design. And this is not an isolated case. As I said earlier, we now have over 3,000 designers across the company. And that means that IBM business leaders have seen the value of design in a big way and are responding by investing in it, by hiring more designers. A key reason for this investment is that design leaders like Haiti Francis are intentionally elevating their unique design skills, behaviors, artifacts, and practices in these critical business situations. Like the leaders I told you about earlier, like Sam, Raquel, James, and Randy, we are understanding our users in this business environment in an empathetic way, using empathy. We're thinking at a system level, we're prototyping, we're visualizing, and we're telling great stories. As I wrap up, just to kind of bring things to a close here, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. We are in the midst of an extraordinary time for our profession and an unbelievable time for our world. We've got huge opportunities for design and designers, and it's really the opportunities have never been greater. Design has indeed, and at long last, gained a seat at the table, and our skills are needed more than ever to address the incredible challenges that are facing us right now. My hope is that as all of us, this generation of design leaders steps into new roles and new challenges, that we're able to retain, enhance, and maximize those special skills that we have as designers, and that we can be confident that those skills, when we use them with intent, are in fact an awesome way to show up as leaders in a complex world. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my talk. Katie, if you're still there, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, and maybe we can take a question or two.
Sounds great. Yep, I'm hanging in here with you. We've got a couple of really great questions. I'm actually seeing a pretty common thread through some of them too. First off, I want to say, I think you summed it up really well, this concept that many of us end up in leadership without either quite expecting it or necessarily feeling prepared for it. And I think the different design-based skills that you listed, whether we know that we have those or not, I know for myself personally, it makes me feel more secure that, that I've already got some stuff running through my blood that can kind of work with me in that role. So thank you so much for that. As I queue up, we think we've got time for about two questions maybe. As I queue those up, make sure you pop over to our polls tab and let us know how helpful this topic was for you, and Doug's expertise that he brought here. So I guess, if I were to sum up this thread of, the topics that I'm seeing here, how would you say that designers could prove to leadership and executives that their core skill is not just limited to sketching wireframes and doing the really stereotypical design things, but instead, being able to do that broader thing of listening to and understanding human beings? I'm sure that you had to do a lot of that in your transition from design to leadership.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Katie, and this is a super important question, because that's really the transition that we're talking about. This movement from being really our focus, the job that designers do, being very tactical, like the wireframes, the Photoshop work, the pixel perfection, these very sort of hands-on skills, to running scaled organizations. And so we've got to, first of all, we've got to do the tactical stuff very well. We've got to make sure that we are making ourselves so valuable that any business leader will not, they'd be a fool to not increase their investment in design because we're doing such a great job. But then we've got to show that we can contribute to the conversation, to the strategy, to the operations of these bigger businesses as they grow. And that's the trick. I didn't really talk about this too much in my talk here, but there's a real element of trust, of relationship building that we need to be very good at. And I think that most designers are actually quite good at that, but we need to get to know who our leaders are, who our business leaders are as people, using empathy, using some of the skills that I talked about and that we all know very well. But we need to build that relationship. We need to build that trust, and everything then kind of builds on top of that. When a leader, when we have a trusting relationship with our leadership, then we can we can really do some great things. Katie, you know how great a leader Haiti Francis is. Haiti, who I mentioned in my talk, and the relationship that she has with Mary O'Brien, the GM of IBM Security, is a very close one. There's a lot of trust there, and that allows them to do some very important things. Clearly, Randy Hunt, in the beginning of my talk, and his CEO have a very close trust and strong relationship with each other. That's how it all. That's where it all builds from.
Excellent. Fantastic summary. It's like we as designers are kind of salespeople in and of itself, kind of making sure that we're able to, pitch and build that trust with all of the different people on our team. So excellent.
And that can happen. That doesn't only happen at the CEO level. That happens when you are in your first, role as a manager, as a team lead, as a project lead. No matter where you are as a leader, you still need to be building that trust with your stakeholders, right? It's a scalable idea.
Absolutely, you never outgrow it or the need to do it. Wonderful. Well, we all wanted to thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see your face just personally. And we actually